You are standing somewhere completely ordinary. A kitchen, a bus stop, a corridor at work with bad lighting, and a notice board nobody reads. Someone is saying something to you and you are half listening and the day is doing what days do, and then it happens. The whole moment folds over on itself. This has happened before. Not something like this. This, the exact tilt of the light, the exact word they were about to say, the specific way you were standing when they said it. You have been here. And the strange part is not the feeling. The strange part is how certain it is. It does not arrive as a suspicion. It arrives as a fact fully formed with the weight of a memory behind it. For about 8 seconds, you are absolutely sure you have lived this before. And then just as quickly it drains away. The corridor is just a corridor. The notice board is just a notice board. And you are left standing there, slightly off balance, saying the word out loud to whoever is nearest. Déjà vu. They nod. Everyone knows. Everyone has had it. And that is where it ends every single time. You name it, and naming it makes it feel handled, and you move on with your day and never think about it again. But nothing was explained. Think about what actually just happened in your head. Your brain produced a memory of an event that did not occur. It handed you certainty about something that never happened. And it did this while you were perfectly awake, perfectly sober, and perfectly capable of knowing better. That is not a small thing. If your eyes did that, you would go to a doctor. If you saw a person standing in the corridor who was not there for 8 seconds vividly and then they dissolved, you would not shrug and say a French word and carry on. But when your memory does it, you barely blink. So here is the question. The one hiding under a word so familiar that it stopped sounding like a question a long time ago. Why does a moment sometimes feel like a repeat? Sit with how odd this is because it gets stranger the closer you look. Déjà vu is not just a feeling of familiarity. Familiarity on its own is ordinary. You feel it 100 times a day, and it barely registers. You pass a face in the street, and something says, I know you. You hear 4 notes, and something says, I have heard this. That is your brain doing its job. Déjà vu is different, and the difference is the whole mystery. Because in déjà vu, you feel the familiarity, and at the exact same instant, you know it is false. Both, simultaneously, full strength. Think about how rare that is. Normally, when your brain tells you something, you believe it. That is the arrangement. Your brain reports you accept. You do not stand around interrogating whether the chair you are sitting on is really there. But in this one specific moment, 2 parts of you disagree out loud, and you can hear the argument. One part says, we have been here. Another part says, no, we have not, and you know exactly why not, because you have never been in this city before. And neither one backs down. That is what makes it eerie. Not the false memory. The conflict, the sensation of catching your own mind in the act of being wrong while it is still insisting. There is something else nobody mentions. It is brief, absurdly brief. It comes, and within seconds, it is gone, and it almost never comes back for that same moment. A malfunction that lasts 8 seconds and then repairs itself perfectly. What kind of glitch does that? The first explanation is the one that feels obvious the moment you hear it, and it goes like this. It is a real memory. You just cannot place it. You have been somewhere similar before. A kitchen with the same layout. A corridor with the same bad light. And your brain catching the resemblance throws up a flare of recognition without being able to say what it is recognizing. So, the familiarity is genuine. Only the source is missing. This is a good explanation, and part of it is almost certainly right. Because your memory does work this way. It stores far more than you can ever consciously retrieve. Think of how much you have seen, every room you have walked through, every stretch of pavement, every photograph in a magazine you flipped past in a waiting room in a year you no longer remember. You did not save all of it as stories. But some of the shapes stayed. So, when you walk into a room whose arrangement matches something buried, the shape gets recognized even though the story is long gone. There is a neater version of this involving the word arrangement, not the objects. The layout. A doorway on the left. A window at that height. Furniture in a specific relationship to a specific corner. Change the objects entirely, keep the geometry, and something in you still says, I have stood in this shape before. A researcher named Anne Cleary spent years testing exactly this, and she built a clever way to do it. She used virtual environments. She would walk people through a series of scenes, then later show them a completely new scene. One they had definitely never seen built out of different objects entirely. But secretly, its spatial layout was copied from an earlier scene they had already forgotten. And that is when déjà vu spiked. New room, new contents, same geometry. And people reported the feeling reliably in a laboratory on demand, which means the layout theory is not a guess. It is something you can trigger. But that raises a question underneath the question. Why would a matching shape produce a feeling of pastness at all? The answer is one of the quiet, unsettling facts about your own mind. Your brain does not have a stamp that marks memories with a date. There is no little label reading seen before attached to the things you have encountered. So, it has to work out familiarity some other way. And the shortcut it uses is ease. When something is easy to process, when the shapes resolve fast and the room parses smoothly and your eyes know where to go without effort, your brain reads that ease as evidence. Easy means I have handled this before. Effortless means old. That is the rule of thumb. And most of the time it is a good one because things really are easier the second time. Now you can see the trap. Ease can come from somewhere else. If the geometry of a room happens to match something already sitting in you, this brand new place will parse unusually smoothly. Your eyes will move through it without friction. Everything will fall into place a fraction too easily. And your brain reading the smoothness will draw the only conclusion it knows how to draw. We have been here. The fluency was real. The conclusion was wrong. And notice what this means. You do not remember the past directly. You infer it from how a moment feels to process. Your sense of having lived something is a calculation run in the dark from a clue that can be faked. So, there it is. A tidy answer. Déjà vu is a forgotten memory recognized by its shape and not its story. Except, it does not explain the part that matters most. Because here is the crack. If déjà vu were simply an unplaced memory, it would not feel strange. Think about what an unplaced memory actually feels like. You have those constantly. You see a face and cannot name it. A word sits on your tongue and refuses to come. A song is familiar, but you cannot say from where. What is that like? Vague, frustrating, itchy. You reach for it and find fog. Now compare that with déjà vu. Déjà vu is not vague. That is the entire point. It is sharp, specific, and total. Not a fog, but a floodlight. And crucially, it comes with something the tip of the tongue feeling never has the knowledge that it is wrong. When you cannot name a face, you do not think this face is impossible. You think, I have forgotten. Your brain accepts the memory and blames the retrieval. In déjà vu, your brain does the opposite. It rejects the memory outright while continuing to feel it. That is the piece the first explanation cannot carry. There is another old explanation worth pausing on because almost everyone arrives at it independently and it sounds wonderfully mechanical. The idea is timing. Information from the world reaches your brain by more than one route, and those routes do not run at identical speeds. So imagine a scene arriving twice a fraction of a second apart. The second copy lands in a brain that has already processed the first, and a brain that has already processed something reads it as old. Hence, this is happening again. It is a satisfying picture. A tiny lag, and the present gets misfiled as the past. But it struggles the moment you press on it. Because if déjà vu were a simple timing hiccup, it should be much more democratic than it is. It should not care whether you are 20 or 70. Signals are signals. Wires do not become more punctual with age. Yet déjà vu falls away steadily across a lifetime. And it should not care what kind of place you are standing in. But it does. It clusters around new environments. Unfamiliar rooms travel the very situations where your brain is working hardest to make sense of a layout it has not seen before. That is not the signature of a wiring delay. That is the signature of a recognition system under load doing difficult work and occasionally producing a wrong answer. So, the timing theory joins the first one. Not useless, but not enough. And there is a second crack, and this one is harder to argue with. If déjà vu were a memory system failing, it should get worse as your memory gets worse. It does not. Déjà vu is most common in young adults. It peaks somewhere in your teens and 20s, and then it steadily, reliably declines for the rest of your life. Read that again because it points the wrong way. The older you get, the more your memory struggles, the more names you lose and rooms you walk into for no reason you can recall. And yet, the false memories get rarer. If déjà vu were memory breaking down, the pattern would be reversed. It would be a young person's rarity and an old person's daily companion. It is the exact opposite. Which means déjà vu is not the sound of memory failing. It might be the sound of something working. To see what you have to stop thinking about memory as one thing. Because it isn't. And this is the piece that unlocks the whole mystery. When you recognize something, two entirely different processes can be responsible, and they can run independently of each other. The first is recollection. That is the full experience. You see the face, and you get the name, the place, the year, the reason you know them. The whole file opens. The second is familiarity. That is a signal without content. A bare feeling of, I have encountered this, arriving with no file attached at all. You know both of these from your own life, even if you have never separated them. Recollection is seeing your neighbor and thinking, that's Tom from number 4. Familiarity is seeing a man in an airport in a foreign country and feeling certain you know him with nothing behind it. No name, no context, just the signal humming. Normally these two travel together. Familiarity fires, recollection follows a half-second later, and the whole thing feels like one smooth act of recognition. But they are separate systems. And separate systems can come apart. Now you can see what déjà vu might be. Familiarity firing at full strength. Recollection producing nothing at all. The alarm goes off with no fire attached. And we know this is not just a story, because there are people for whom déjà vu is not an occasional oddity. It is a warning. For some people with epilepsy, seizures begin in a particular region deep in the side of the brain. And in the seconds before the seizure arrives, they experience an aura, a strange sensation that announces what is coming. For a striking number of them, that aura is déjà vu, not a mild version. The full experience, sometimes stronger than anything you have felt, arriving reliably minutes before the storm, which tells you something important. This feeling has an address. It is not floating free in the mind. It is produced by specific tissue in a specific place, and when that tissue misfires, the feeling comes. That was demonstrated more directly decades ago by a neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield. He was operating on patients with severe epilepsy, and to avoid damaging anything essential, he needed to map their brains while they were awake. So he would apply a small electrical current to a point on the surface and ask what they felt. Most of the time, the answers were what you would expect: a tingle, a twitch, a flash of light. But when he stimulated certain regions in the temporal lobe, something else happened. Patients reported vivid experiences, snatches of scenes, music, voices, and, in some cases, the unmistakable sense that the present moment had happened before. Current in, familiarity out. Sit with how strange that is. A feeling you have always treated as meaningful as a message about your life can be produced by electricity applied to a piece of tissue the size of a fingertip, not summoned from your past, generated, on demand. So the signal is real, and it is physical, and it can arrive without anything in the world causing it, which sharpens the mystery rather than solving it. And if the familiarity signal really is a separate dial, then it should be possible to turn it the other way. It is, and you can do it to yourself right now. Pick an ordinary word, door. Write it out 20 times, or just say it over and over without stopping. Somewhere around the 12th repetition, something goes wrong with it. The word stops being a word. The letters come apart. The sound turns into noise, and for a moment you cannot quite believe this arrangement of shapes means anything at all. It has not changed. You have known it since you were 3, and yet the familiarity has drained out of it right in front of you. That is the mirror image of déjà vu, and it has its own name. Jamais vu. Never seen. People report it in bigger forms too. Looking at your own front door and finding it briefly alien. Hearing a close friend's voice and having it land as a stranger's for half a second. Nothing about the world moved, only the signal did. And this is the cleanest proof you will get, that familiarity is not a property of things out there. It is a reading your brain produces, and, like any reading, it can be turned up until it fires at nothing, or worn down until it fails at something you have known your whole life. Déjà vu is that dial stuck too high. Jamais vu is the same dial dropped to 0, and that explains the specific texture of it. The reason déjà vu feels overwhelming rather than vague is that the familiarity signal is not weak. It is not a faint trace of something half-remembered. It is the full power signal, the one that normally means, yes, definitely we know this, at full volume, pointing at nothing. But even this is not the bottom of it, because a false familiarity signal on its own would not feel eerie. It would just feel like familiarity. Something else has to be happening for you to know it is wrong. And that something is where the answer actually lives. Here's the question nobody asks about déjà vu, and it turns out to be the important one. How do you know? Your brain has just told you with full confidence that you have been here before. Why don't you believe it? Something in your head is refusing to accept a report from your own memory. Something is checking. A researcher named Akira O'Connor wanted to see that checking happen, which meant solving a hard problem. How do you get déjà vu to occur inside a brain scanner on schedule? His team found a way to induce it in the lab, then watched what the brain did in the moment, and the result was not what the old story predicted. If déjà vu were a memory system misfiring, you would expect the memory regions to be lighting up. The deep structures, the ones that build and retrieve your past. That is not primarily what showed. What was active were regions toward the front of the brain, the areas associated with monitoring, with decision-making, with checking whether something adds up, which flips the entire picture. The déjà vu experience may not be the error itself. It may be the sensation of the error being caught. Sit with that because it changes what you are feeling in that corridor. Somewhere in your head, a familiarity signal fired when it should not have. And another part of your brain, whose entire job is to audit incoming claims, looked at that signal, compared it against everything else you know, and raised its hand. This does not add up. We have never been here. Flag it. And that flag, that internal objection, is what surfaces in you as the strangeness. The eeriness is not the malfunction. The eeriness is the correction. You are not experiencing your memory breaking. You are experiencing your memory being fact-checked from the inside in real time. And you are noticing it only because this is the one moment the fact-checker had to speak up, which explains the thing that never made sense. Why déjà vu declines with age. It is not that your memory improves. Obviously it does not. It is that the checking gets quieter. The frontal systems that do this monitoring are the ones that change most as you get older. A younger brain audits aggressively. It catches the false signal objects loudly and hands you 8 seconds of weirdness. An older brain lets more through without comment. So a young person full of déjà vu is not a person with a faulty memory. They are a person with a very loud proofreader. And if that is true, then there should be a way to test it. A way that is grim but decisive. Because if déjà vu is the checking system speaking up, then what happens to someone whose checking system stops working? Chris Moulin, a researcher who has spent years on this exact question, has described patients who show us the answer. These are people often older, often with degenerative changes in the brain, who do not get déjà vu in flashes. They get it constantly. And here is the part that will stay with you. They believe it. There is a name for this. Déjà vécu, already lived. One patient stopped reading the newspaper because he was certain he had read every article before. Another stopped watching television because every program was a repeat. Some would refuse to attend appointments on the grounds that they had already been. Some walking into a room could tell you in detail what they had supposedly done there last time. They were not confused about whether the feeling was real. To them, it was simply the truth. Now compare that with what happens to you. You get the feeling and something immediately objects. You get 8 seconds of strangeness and then you shake it off and carry on. And the reason you can carry on is that a part of you never accepted the claim in the first place. They get the same signal with nothing standing behind it to say no. And the difference between you and them is not the false memory. Both of you have that. The difference is the objection, which means the discomfort you feel during déjà vu, the small, unsettling shiver of it, is the feeling of a defense system holding the line. It is not pleasant, but it is a good sign. And now the question from the very beginning finally has an answer. Why is it so short? Remember how strange that was. A glitch that lasts a handful of seconds and then repairs itself completely every time without leaving a mark. No malfunction behaves like that. But a resolution does. Because think about what is actually happening in those 8 seconds. 2 verdicts have arrived at once, and they contradict each other. Familiarity says yes, everything else says no. And for as long as that stays unresolved, you are standing inside the disagreement. The feeling lasts exactly as long as the argument does. And the argument is short because it is not a fair fight. On one side is a bare signal with nothing behind it. On the other is everything you know about where you are, how you got here, and what city you are standing in. The evidence wins. It always wins. It takes a few seconds. Then the false signal is dismissed, the accounts balance, and the corridor goes back to being a corridor. That is why déjà vu does not linger, and why it almost never returns for the same moment. Once the claim has been rejected, it does not get to make its case again. You are not watching something break and heal. You are watching something get settled. And that is the difference between you and the patients who cannot escape it. For them, nothing arrives to settle it. The claim is made and no one objects, so it simply stands. 8 seconds is not the length of a malfunction. It is the length of an argument you win. There is something else in the pattern of who gets this, and it points the same way. Déjà vu is close to universal. Ask a room of people and the large majority will say yes, they know the feeling, they have had it more than once. But the rate is not even, and the differences are revealing. People who travel more report it more. People who remember their dreams report it more. People who are younger report it more. Now, none of that proves anything on its own. These are correlations, and correlations are slippery, and it is easy to build a story around them that sounds better than the evidence. But notice what those three things have in common. Travel means walking into environments your brain has never assembled before. New geometry being parsed from scratch at speed. Exactly the conditions where a layout might accidentally echo something buried. Remembering dreams means having more stored material that never got filed as a real event. More shapes with no story attached. And being young means having the loudest checking system you will ever have. So, the pattern is not random. It tracks the two halves of the mechanism. More raw material for a false signal and more machinery watching for it. Which is another way of saying the same thing. The people who get déjà vu most are not the ones whose memories are worst. They are the ones doing the most looking and the most checking. There is one more thing about déjà vu, and it is the part that catches people out because almost everyone believes the opposite. While it is happening, many people feel something extra. Not just that they have been here before, but that they know what comes next. The line about to be said, the turn about to be taken. It feels available, hovering just out of reach. Some people build a great deal on that feeling. Premonition, prophecy, a glimpse of a future already written. Anne Cleary tested it. She put people into her virtual environments, triggered déjà vu, and then in the middle of the feeling, asked them to predict what came next, which way the corridor turned, what lay beyond the door. If the feeling were real foresight, they should have done better than chance. They did not. They were no more accurate than guessing, but they were far more confident. That is the finding worth holding on to. The prediction feeling and the prediction ability come apart completely. What déjà vu produces is not knowledge of the future. It is the sensation of knowing, wearing the costume of knowledge, with nothing inside. And that should be quietly humbling, because it means your brain can generate the full, convincing feeling of certainty with no information behind it whatsoever. The confidence is not evidence. The confidence is just another signal, and signals can misfire. Which raises a question that goes well beyond a strange moment in a corridor. How often does that happen without a flag? Here is what all of this actually means about being a person. You walk around assuming your sense of reality is delivered to you whole and finished. That you simply perceive what is and remember what was, and the two arrive clean. They do not. Everything you experience is a construction assembled fast from incomplete parts. Your memory is not a recording being played back. It is a claim being made moment to moment by machinery that is trying to be right and is sometimes wrong. And because it is a claim, something has to evaluate it. That is what has been running underneath your entire life silently without ever once asking for your attention. A process that receives what your memory reports and decides whether it holds up. You have never noticed it. Not once. Because a good auditor is invisible. When the accounts balance, nobody hears from them. You only ever meet them when something does not add up. Déjà vu is the one time it does not add up. That is the whole experience. 8 seconds in a corridor is the only moment in your ordinary life when this hidden process becomes loud enough to feel. You are not glimpsing a past life. You are not touching the future. You are hearing the internal machinery that decides what counts as real, doing the one thing that makes it audible, disagreeing. And once you see that, you notice what a strange kind of creature that makes you. You are not a mind that simply believes itself. You are a mind that argues with itself about what happened constantly and mostly wins. Every memory you trust today was passed by that process. Every fair certainty you have about your own past cleared a check you never knew was running. The strangeness of déjà vu is not a defect in that system. It is the only proof you will ever get that the system exists. So, come back to the question. The one buried under a word so familiar it stopped being a question. Why does a moment sometimes feel like a repeat? Not because it was one, and not because you dreamed it or lived it before or slipped for a second into some other version of your life. Not in the end, because your memory failed. A signal fired that should not have fired. Familiarity at full strength, arriving without a single memory attached to justify it. Perhaps because the room's shape matched something you saw once and forgot completely, and then something in you checked it. Compared the claim against the facts, found it impossible, and raised an objection. The objection is the feeling. That is what has been happening in the corridor every time your whole life. Not a haunting, not a message. The sound of your own mind, refusing to accept a memory that never earned the right to be one. Déjà vu is not evidence that you have been here before. It is evidence that something inside you is still checking. So the next time it comes, and it will in some ordinary room with bad lighting, notice what you are actually feeling, not a door opening onto another life. A quiet, invisible thing that has protected your sense of what is real for as long as you have been alive, becoming audible for a few seconds and then going back to work. You are standing somewhere completely ordinary, and for 8 seconds you get to hear the part of you that decides what counts as real. Then the corridor is just a corridor again, and you go back to trusting it because something in there has already checked.